Welcome to the second part in a three-part series on real-world testing with Django, where we will cover the common testing scenarios and patterns that you'll run into. In this video, we're going to cover how to test a model method where we need to mock out specific things, and then we're also going to cover testing a mixin without having to include it in an existing view. It is recommended that you've already looked at the Model Mommy video and the PyMox video. If you haven't, please hit the show notes and watch those first before you give this one a watch. First thing we're going to look at testing is our published body method on our article model. If we'll go ahead and take a look at it, we can see that we're instantiating a new instance of Markdown, setting a renderer, and we're rendering out self.body and converting that Markdown that we would have in that field into HTML. In order to test this, we need to actually call this published body by hand in our test method. So if we'll open up our tests and we'll go to our model tests, and then we'll go into our article test, and we'll start by creating a test published body method. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create an article. We're going to set the body to hello, since this is what's going to actually convert and we want to know what's going to be there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to actually stub out Markdown and stub out the render method. In this way, we don't really care what render returns back because we're not actually testing whether Markdown works. We're just testing that our function gets called. And we also want to test that we know exactly what comes back. So when we call markdown.render, we're going to return converted text. So when we set up our test and do replay all, and then we call our function and do verify all we have to do now is do our assert equal and compare the response from calling published body with what we were expecting, which is converted text. So we'll go ahead and jump out of our code and we'll actually try to run the tests. You see we get it and we have all passing tests. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to test a view mixin. What we're going to do is we're going to test the category list mixin from our mixins. The concept behind this is we add this to our mixin so that we can get all of our categories so we can display it on our blog in like the side panel. This is easier to just add these to our views instead of trying to override get context data all the time to add in categories. The inherent problem though with having mixins is, if you'll notice the inheritance, it inherits from object. So if we go in and we try to do a test normally, it's very difficult to test our get context data because it actually calls a superclass, and a super of object does not have get context data in it. So in order to test this, let's go ahead and jump over to our tests and we'll look at how to start testing this. I already have all the imports done, so we don't have to actually worry about that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our class definition of class mixin test. We'll inherit from test case. And the next thing we need to do is we need to actually create a test view to use. So create class test view. We'll use our category list mixin. We're also going to inherit from template view, which is a normal view that we would have that would have get context data in it. We're going to do pass because we don't actually need anything else because this is just a base view. So when we call the super of get context data, it actually calls something. And from there, we do actually our normal testing. We'll do our setup where we instantiate our new view, in this case self.testView, since it's a part of this class. We'll set up our mocks and our teardown for our unset stubs. Then we'll jump into our test of test get context data. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to stub out our category.objectsAll method call because we don't need to actually call any data because that's not what we're testing. And then we want to set, hey, when we call category.objects.all, that we return the text other. And this is a good sanity check to make sure that it's actually being called so that when we do our assert later, we actually test for the word other and we're not actually getting some sort of like empty query setback. So we'll do our replay all and verify all, and in the middle of that we have our self.view.getContextData. This is actually going to call everything, and in our getContextData it's actually going to go ahead and call the super. We haven't mocked that out or anything, so it's actually going to call the template view super. I'm not really going to worry about what that does. I'm just telling you this so that you know it's actually called. After we call that, we're going to have context data. So we'll just assert that categories in the context dictionary is set to other when we do our assertion. That's really it. If you'll look at it, it's a normal test that we normally do on almost anything else, and would be the same similar test that you would run when you have a template view when you're overriding get context data. The only difference is we're including the basic test view in our category mixin test. That way we don't have to worry about trying to test these mixins inside of other tests. We're actually able to test the mixin itself and only the mixin. This is actually good unit testing because we're testing the functionality of one thing and we're not trying to compose it into other things while we're doing our tests. So with that, let's actually give this a run. So if we run it, you'll see we have all passing tests, and you'll see the test get context data at the top of our run there, and it has tests mixin, and category mixin test. Well, that's actually it for our new tests, but I actually wanted to circle back around and talk about the first test that we actually wrote. And I want to talk about a different testing philosophy from the one that we explored in our first test. So if we'll go back into our model tests and we'll go take a look at our test published body. In this one, we're actually mocking out the Markdown renderer so that when we actually send something, we're mocking it out so that we tell it what it comes back as. Conceptually, this is so that we aren't actually testing Markdown, but we're unit testing our published body, because that's what we really care about. Because what's happening is we're saying, hey, when this render happens, we want to return back converted text. And then converted text is what comes back when we call the article.publishedBody. That's a very, very specific unit test. But there's also another conceptual way to unit test, and I'm going to tell you about it, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which way you want to do it. In this case, you would not mock out Markdown, and you would actually go ahead and let it convert Markdown appropriately. So let's actually go ahead and take a look at doing that. We need to remove all of our mocking framework stuff. Then we have to go back up and edit the body tag. So we're going to put a pound in front of hello because that'll be converted into an H1. And then we need to go into our assertion and put in the H1 on both sides of hello. So if we close out of that and we actually try to run it, we'll get a fail, because what's coming back is hello inside of H1s with a hard return at the end, and not what we did, which didn't have a hard return. So let's just quickly jump back in, add our hard return, boom, run our tests again, and they pass. So the reason this is a little bit different is because we're actually relying on what the actual code did in the background, and we actually see the result that we get back. One of the advantages of doing this is if we want to go ahead and change out our Markdown renderer, then we would just change out the Markdown renderer, we would run our tests, it returns the same result, and boom, it's done. We can see that everything worked out right. The inherent problem with that is if the new Markdown renderer doesn't support it, or the new Markdown renderer doesn't have the hard return at the end like this one does. The other good thing though is if you consistently do things like this and you don't mock everything out, then when you go to change out things and you render it out, you quickly know when everything is working. Doing it the other way, where you mock everything out, if you have to change core pieces of your application, you also have to change core pieces of your tests. And you'll have to actually spend that little extra time to make sure that you get the results and it works the way you want it to do. There's merits for both and there's downsides for both ways of testing, but I wanted to present both of those to you so that you can make an educated decision as to which way that you want it to go. And with that, I thank you for watching, and please join us for the next video.